Hey everybody, welcome to Street Smart Live. I'm Cindy Edwards. Today we are featuring a company we have had on here before, Algernon Pharmaceuticals, and they have some very exciting news for us. But before we get to that, please take a look at our disclosure statement. And I hope you can read quickly. And while you're at it, why not hit the subscribe button below so that you're up to date on all the Street Smart Lives that are coming up in the future. And we've got some fun broadcasts coming up. Thank you so much for doing that. All right, Algernon Pharmaceuticals is a drug repurposing company, which currently has two different human trials underway for the drug ifenprotal, one for chronic cough and idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis and COVID-19. But that is not their only focus. There's a lot of buzz these days around psychedelics like psilocybin or magic mushrooms, and Algernon is entering that space with something it hopes will help stroke patients recover. It is called DMT. Joining us now are Chris Moreau, CEO of Algernon. We've got Dr. Mark Williams, Algernon's Chief Science Officer, and Dr. Mark Swaim, founder and editor of BioPub. Hi, gentlemen.
Hi.
Good to see you all again. Chris, I want to start with you. Why is Algernon announcing a new research program when you already have a COVID-19 study going right now?
Well, you know, Algernon can walk and chew gum at the same time. And our business model is to advance drugs, repurpose them, and move them into clinical trials. It's always been Mark's and my view to have as many of these compounds in clinical trials as possible. Historically, 50% of clinical trials are successful. We don't control the data on any of the trials. We're always hopeful, and we do our best to make sure that we're doing good science and that our compounds have the best chance of being successful. But I think with our model, and this has been the case since day one, we've talked about having multiple compounds being investigated and moving them into clinical trials. It will drive shareholder value. It just makes good sense, especially at what we consider to be a very capital efficient model, and the costs. We've been able to manage them when we're getting these trials started, so it makes sense.
So this doesn't mean you think that the COVID-19 data is not going to be positive, so you're trying to head in a different direction. That's the trial, that data, you're not saying that that's not going to be good.
Of course. We're not pivoting. We're just adding. We're making the story more interesting. Our data for the COVID trial is coming out at the end of February. But again, we have the capacity, we have the skill sets, we have the knowledge, we have the relationships to move additional drugs. And so this announcement today is exciting, but it just adds to what to our offer.
So what is it about DMT? And there are so many drugs to choose from. What is it about this, and what are you investigating?
So we are investigating a psychedelic compound called dimethyltryptamine, NN-DMT. And DMT it's an interesting compound, and we'll let Dr. Mark Williams give you some of the more technical information. But this is a psychedelic that occurs naturally in animals and plants. It has been used for a long period of time in South America with certain cultures. It does result in a psychedelic experience. It clears the body very quickly. It has a 15-minute or less half-life. And so, as mentioned earlier, there's a lot of interest in the psychedelic space. We're taking a different approach. Dr. Williams, when I first talked to him about our new program, or coming up with a new program in early December, I had a call from a major fund who said they're investing in psychedelic drugs. Is there anything that Algernon might consider? And I sat down with Mark. We had a coffee. And I said, you're going to be busy this Christmas holiday, because I said, I really want you to look at this from a very unique perspective. And Mark started to look at psilocybin, some of the other psychedelic drugs. He focused on DMT. There's very interesting data that suggests DMT provides neuroplasticity and neurogenesis in the brain, helping brain cells develop new connections, and but importantly, a sub-hallucinogenic dose. So a microdose of DMT where we can still see the benefits, but patients don't have that psychedelic experience. So we're looking at a different therapeutic angle for DMT.
Okay, Dr. Williams, let's talk a little bit more about DMT and what you found. I know you did a lot of research into this, and what was it that got you really excited about going after the stroke angle and how this could potentially help people's brains recover?
Sure. Well, thanks for the question. Well, twofold. Number one, in a previous role, I helped shepherd a compound along that ultimately did go into clinical trials for ischemic stroke. So that was always sort of in the background of my head. And you and maybe other people have had family members that have suffered from some form of a stroke potentially in the past. So there was also that element for me as well, because that did touch my family. And, I've always been interested in the idea of neuroplasticity. And for me, it was sort of a natural that, one of the biggest problems with stroke is you have to rewire the brain in many cases because of the damage. And so, putting that previous experience in that area and being asked to look at the psychedelics from a unique angle, we did some digging, and lo and behold, there was a very interesting paper that was published that did a exposure of animals to DMT, and they found, in my opinion, very strong recovery rates and so forth, reducing of the infarct volume and almost complete restoration of mobility in the limb. And that's obviously a huge hurdle, and we don't know how well that will translate to a human condition. But we do know that the doses has to probably be subhallucinogenic, because hallucinations have caused many drugs to fail in clinical trials, that if they were able to not have a hallucinatory adverse event, then they actually might have made it across the line. So we looked at the literature and found that there was evidence that you could divorce the neuroplasticity effect from the psychedelic effect. And so we are taking that tact, and we want to rapidly determine if we can do that in a clinical trial by identifying that subhallucinogenic dose of DMT, and yet still have some restoration of function ultimately in a stroke or some other patient where movement has been impaired and requires rewiring.
Do you think you could get DMT into the clinical trials as quickly as you did with ifenprotal?
I think we can. I've had some very good initial feedback from various sites and so forth. I think it would be very fair to say that we intend to be well on our way into the clinic by this year, and that's our goal. And we've done it now twice with Algernon, and other people can say they were amazed that we were able to do it on the budget and the timelines that we did do it for COVID. So we're going to try and apply the same effort and insight and try and get DMT into the clinic similarly very quickly. And as I said, we've kind of already pre-identified a few places or potential partners where we can do that with.
Exciting stuff. Okay, Dr. Mark Swaim, is the hype surrounding psychedelics warranted, do you think?
Cindy, I think it may not be hype, actually. When I first heard of the surge in investing in that direction, I thought, well, Albert Hoffman, synthesized and famously took LSD in 1943 and took his famous magical bicycle ride. And I thought, well, if there was something to this, wouldn't it have surfaced before then? But think of planets in orbits at different rates. The psychedelics, it's as if they're out there coming around again, and the orbit is about to overlap with something in a very different orbit, which is neuroscience, which was in a very primitive orbit, decades ago. The tools weren't nearly what they are now to study and explore. The cellular, molecular understanding, it was not there before, it is now. The imaging techniques are there now. And so it's actually a perfect time for a confluence of the two to sort of overlap. You've got peanut butter in my chocolate, that kind of thing, to study the two together. And I would also gently contend that Chris Moreau is more nuanced than he's making himself out to be. It's not simply that Algernon is jumping on to, a bandwagon of psychedelic drug study, but he's jumping into a space where the standard of care is appalling. It's the most appalling it's ever been during my medical career. And I'm talking about for stroke. We think about heart attacks as bad things because they kill you, and stroke you die less often from, and or somehow that's a milder thing. Well, given my druthers between those two, I might just take the heart attack and die rather than be rendered inhuman without my capacity to understand puns or jokes or have emotions or to use my limbs. And our standard of care for stroke, you have no idea how debased it is. There are multiple reasons for that, but research is all but dried up there. The cost of the thrombolytics has gotten hospital administrators to brainwash physicians into not using those. We let people have their brain infarcts and then send them off to be rehabilitated, and we're not doing very well there. And if we can bring a new agent to clinic to induce neuroplasticity to regenerate brain, we're doing a great thing, and it's a needed thing. And over the years, I've taken care of a number of patients who, shall we say, have experienced far and wide with drugs of various kinds. I've talked to patients who've used tryptamine, DHT recreationally, and it's interesting that they do describe consciousness expansion. If you want to put it in those terms, it's almost as if they, in a primitive way, are describing the forming of new neural links there from their own, experimentation. So,
right.
I don't think that this is a lark by the company or by the industry, and I think they chose wisely the agent to embark upon the study, and I think it's going to be very interesting. The outcome, regardless of the outcome, is going to be interesting, frankly.
Well, as a physician and a researcher, tell us more about the early data on DMT's ability to help brain cells actually heal.
There is some evidence. It's not overwhelming, but what's there is positive that suggests that, first of all, when I was in medical school, we were all taught that the brain is a static organ and that you're losing cells every single day. Well, we know that was patently wrong. We now know that it's a plastic organ, on a normal day, that it's a plastic organ. The fastest way to go into dementia is to lose hearing from chemotherapy and not use hearing aids and stop interacting with the world. The brain atrophies. It needs stimulation. Well, it seems plausible that if you were to stimulate the brain in a way very different to how it's normally stimulated, that is by pushing it gently into a hallucinogenic state, that you could probably begin to tweak nerves to make them reach out, touch other nerves, reach out, interact with other nearby nerves in new ways, bring about things that wouldn't normally be wrought. And I think that's, as I read the early data, that's what it suggested. It's far from comprehensive data, let's be honest, but is it promising enough to justify study? You better believe it. Yes, it is. And, I say bring on the work.
It's exciting stuff. Dr. Williams, when you look at DMT, is this something you think you might be able to deliver to a stroke patient as early as in an ambulance while they're on the way to the hospital?
It's an excellent question, and we're looking into that. That's part of our thoughts. There's still additional work that needs to get done on confirming the timing and the exact dosage levels that will be effective. There are examples of drugs that were tested that were delivered in an ambulance on the way to the hospital. So that is conceivable, yes. We're also looking at, even if you didn't get to the hospital in time and you weren't able to have anything like the surgery, the roto-rooter surgery, essentially they call it, or the TPA, or if you're in the case of a hemorrhagic stroke, those are not appropriate. But even 3 to 4 months down the line, when you're going through the rehabilitation, you're still actually, in the case of, say, constrained induced movement therapy, you're forcing the brain to use the damaged limb or the non-responsive limb, and that too also triggers rewiring, neuroplasticity in that case. And there, our thinking is that, well, again, if we come on board with an agent that can boost that neuroplasticity during that rehabilitation process, maybe we can help patients who have long-term disability recover as well, because that's a very useful therapy. And then, by the way, that's not just a limited to stroke at that point. There's some evidence now that same kind of therapy might be useful to treat multiple sclerosis patients, Parkinson's patients, patients with traumatic brain injury. So, if you are able to induce this rewiring and neuroplasticity effect, it may have broader applications we don't know yet. I mean, it's a very exciting frontier to be in. And, I think this is where the medicine is very, very exciting. And I certainly hope that the science bears out the thoughts. So if it does, then it could change the landscape for lots of patients, for lots of diseases.
I think an education campaign would be really important as well, because a lot of people think, my loved one has suffered enough. Last thing I want is for them to go on a bad trip because of a hallucinogenics. And that's not what this is about. It's
right.
microdosing. How do you imagine that this would be administered? Is this intravenous?
Yeah, that's so the DMT, unlike some of the other related tryptamine molecules, is not orally active. So it would be delivered intravenously. The advantage DMT has over the other tryptamines, however, is that it clears your system, as Chris had mentioned, very quickly. So in the case of a clinician, it's, you turn off the valve and boom, 10, 15 minutes later, most of the drug is, or at least half the drug is cleared from the body. So it's well suited clinically and especially acutely for that. We do have some other ideas. There's some very good research outlining how long to expose neurons to agents that trigger neuroplasticity. So that's also part of the trial, is to confirm that the length of exposure, that is how long you're on an IV infusion, will lead to clinical benefits. So there's still a lot of science and especially clinical science, that needs to get done, and we would like to position ourselves as being a leader in that research, and certainly in the case of the use of DMT and stroke and mobility issues.
How excited are you about this prospect?
It's as a graduate student, you kind of dream of opportunities like this. I think I feel very fortunate that we have the opportunity here. I certainly think we've got a relatively well thought through program. And we're starting to get a lot of buying interest from people who are really leaders in that space, who are also excited to see the possible application of this research into a new area that probably very few people were thinking of, at least initially. But on reflection, it kind of makes sense that, again, a stroke is a catastrophic event where the brain must rewire itself to try and regain function. So trying to boost that with an agent that looks like it can do it is, and intuitively or scientifically, has a reasonable method or reasonable reason for working.
Oh, it's going to be a game changer, a life changer if this works. Chris, you've got some pretty heavy hitters on board as consultants, and they include Dr. Rick Strassman, author of the book The Spirit Molecule. It's a really good documentary as well. What has their response been to the stroke program that you're announcing?
Actually, just this morning we had another call with a leading expert in clinical trials related to psychedelics, and he acknowledged to Mark and I that when he first heard of the idea, he thought it was a bit loony. Then he said he read the papers, and he said after he read the papers, he sat back and said, "Wow, this is." I mean, there are just as Dr. Mark said, there are just so few treatments. If you have an ischemic injury, which is a blockage to the brain, the cells are being deprived of oxygen. You have clot busters, TPA, you have blood thinners, you have surgical options, but it's very limited. If you have a hemorrhagic stroke where there's a bleed in the brain, you can't use blood thinners. And so there's surgical mechanical relief that can help try to stop and dry up that bleed. But there's really not a lot out there. So from a perspective of being not a scientist, but driving the business end of it and working with Mark to reach out to some of these experts, was very interesting to be connecting with Dr. Strassman, the author of The Spirit Molecule. I'm well into the book. And to think that he was the one in the early 1990s, during the war on drugs, was able to convince the FDA to allow testing. And we have Dr. Choi, who is a leading stroke specialist. We've let the market know a little bit about their backgrounds. We also have Dr. Nutt from the UK, who also has extensive experience with psychedelics. So we've assembled a group of very big thought leaders. All of them are very interested in exploring this. We can do it very efficiently, cost effectively. And as the market knows, we have also established a foothold with intellectual property. This is a challenge that anybody trying to get into this space are going to face, because this is a naturally occurring compound and there's been a great deal of research already done. So there's prior art. Some of the companies who are trying to be vertically integrated, they're either trying to manufacture it and own clinics where there's psychotherapy, and that will make it somewhat commoditized once it's approved. We're taking a different approach. We're trying to take a clinical drug development pharma approach to taking DMT and moving it through research and hopefully through approval if it's successful.
Well, I'm curious about where this will be tested. Are there issues testing it in the United States right now? And what countries are you looking at?
So we're looking at, so this is a controlled substance, and some jurisdictions don't allow it at all. As an example, China. There are jurisdictions like Australia, Canada, the US, it's allowed, it's been done, it's a little more complicated. Europe, some countries. So we are leveraging our knowledge, our relationships to be able to be right with the CROs, the labs, manufacturing, where they have that experience, they have the licenses. We don't want to waste a minute to make sure that we can start advancing our program. And I think we've taken meaningful steps, and we're well on our way to actually beginning to prosecute our business plan and our development pathway for DMT.
And of course, everybody wants to know, how soon? When can I sign up? How do I get in on this?
Remember, it's hallucinogenic, right?
That's true. That's true. It's very serious, and but obviously, that's what investors want to know. That's what people in the medical profession want to know. That's what patients want to know. I mean, especially if you've got somebody that's had a stroke and they're having a really hard time functioning. Like, realistically, when could this maybe start being tested on humans in this study?
I would think that our plan is to be in the clinic with a phase 1 trial in this year, before the end of 2021 or sooner. That would mean we would be looking to move into a phase 2 trial next year. We've got lots of additional news to announce in terms of some of the phase 2 trials that we're planning, and how that and our preclinical programs will help guide Mark and the team through some of the decision process. But typically speaking, if you take a drug, repurposing, and thanks, I suppose, if there's anything that's positive out of COVID related to drug knowledge, is that the average person now really can understand the value of repurposing a drug. That you can take a drug that has multi-effects in the body, and you can much more quickly move it into new areas of investigation and more quickly move it through regulatory approval. As an example, because of the work done by Dr. Strassman in phase 1 trials, there's a reduced amount of toxicology work that a company like Algernon would have to do to also get into the clinic, because the data and the overwhelming information in the public domain is significant, and we can rely on that information. But generally speaking, you're probably talking about 4 to 5 years from an idea to having a drug, a repurposed drug, work its way through the system and get approved. That's sort of I think, a reasonable time period compared to 12 or 13 years for a new chemical entity.
Dr. Swaim, how optimistic are you about DMT's potential?
It's a good question, Cindy. At Biopub, we follow small cap biotech investing situations for investment worthiness. And I can think of at least 4 other companies that are trying to position themselves to be participants in the stroke care recovery arena. And I'll be very honest here, acutely, in the span of a week, Algernon has catapulted itself to the top of that pack. I think it's that promising. And it would take a longer explanation to sort of outline what each other company is doing. But I think by comparison, yes, this is that promising. And so this is a splash surprise announcement that vaunts this company to the leader of the pack if you want to, invest in stroke therapeutics.
Oh, well, that's good news to a lot of people, I'm sure, that are listening right now. Dr. Williams, do we all have DMT? Is there a small part of our brain that produces it? Or are we clear on that right now?
I think that's a good question. It's if it does exist. Well, I'm actually going to go read the paper very shortly here that was getting sent to me from one of our advisors on this. There certainly exists in nature, and it's certainly in plants, and as Chris had mentioned outside that, there's some thoughts that it's in the pineal gland. I've even heard rumors or thoughts that maybe it's involved in dreaming. So you get the visual side of dreaming. I've heard that before. I don't know. I mean, I'm focused, on the medicinal use of the compound, and going after doses that I think will have an effect. But it's an intriguing question. And if it's there, why is it there? Is it meant for us to be use that in some situations biologically? Is it a protection mechanism? Not sure. It's going to open up doors of questions and huge scientific questions to get answered in the next 10, 20 years.
And
Chris, go ahead.
Cindy, and we're not deprecating any other current research or work that's focused on the psychedelic, because the psychedelic elements that may help drug addiction, post-traumatic stress, those are all proper pathways. So and indications. It's just that we're taking this other pathway. I think we're going to add. This is what's exciting in terms of neuroscience. The work that Algernon is going to do will hopefully also open the door for other research and investigation into not only DMT but other psychedelics and what's their real impact on the brain. You've got the psychedelic experience, which in and of itself may be a goal or an objective if you're talking about therapy. But then what's the biomechanical elements that are behind that? And is it actually providing either healing, regeneration, making new connections? I mean, Mark and I have had some pretty exciting discussions about what this could mean if you, in fact, have a compound that could be administered that might help you get a little smarter, get a little better.
Sign me up.
It's a very interesting space. It's quite exciting, and I hope our investors are also excited about the potential of this program now for Algernon.
And Dr. Williams, being able to access this DMT, there's a synthetic form of this that is readily available to you?
Well, it's not necessarily readily available. That's a good question, and we're working on getting our supply set up for our clinical trials, a steady, stable supply. That's critical for us. That's part of the process to get to the clinic as well. There's certainly reports of small amounts being made, but we're going to be doing this on large scales. Ultimately the kilogram quantities, which certainly would be more difficult to make at a university or God forbid in somebody's kitchen. But that's a key thing is that supply. And again, for us as a drug development play, I mean, we will need to fulfill the requirements of an FDA or EMA requirement for quality of material, and the best way to do that is through cGMP synthesis of the drug. So we're working on securing that and using that to go into the clinic as quickly as possible.
And you mentioned there are two types of stroke. There's the hemorrhagic, so that's the brain bleed, and then you've got the blood clot. I imagine this test that you're doing would be to help people who had both kinds of stroke? Potentially. One of the issues with DMT is that it does elevate blood pressure, which in the case of a hemorrhagic stroke could have a negative impact. Some elevation of blood pressure is tolerated in ischemic, but again, these are all questions that need to get confirmed, which is one reason I also like, by the way, the idea of doing it as a rehabilitation type of thing, well after the initial insult. Both hemorrhagic and ischemic stroke patients, often about 85% of them have some residual problems with mobility.
And again, we haven't even talked about the percentage of patients who are able to get to the hospital in time to get access to the treatment. So this would, be more broadly applicable. It would be under a setting which was certainly the patients are in less duress. There's not the life-threatening aspect of it. You can control the situation better. So there's still quite a bit of research to be done to confirm where and when we can administer the drug. My hope is that, yes, the earlier the better. But even if you miss that window, there may be another window during the rehabilitation process where we may be able to administer a DMT molecule and improve the recovery of limb functioning. As I said, not just stroke patients, but potentially many patients who have that some sort of mobility issue.
Okay, I'm just going to take a moment now for final thoughts. Dr. Swaim, you're up.
I'm excited. I think that there's so much we don't know about plasticity. I have a good friend in London who had a major hemorrhagic occipital lobe stroke, who was blind for 10 years. And one day her vision came back. And, what I'm saying is that we might be able to see this invoked later in the course post-stroke recovery and really help people both in thrombotic and hemorrhagic strokes as well. I think it's a brilliant idea. It needs to be taken very seriously by investors, and I mean that in a positive way, because it's a clever strategic move by the company, not only to get in on the investing tide into the psychedelic space, but also to raise the bar of care in stroke, because believe me, it couldn't be much lower than it is right now.
Yeah. Okay. Last word goes to you, Chris Moreau.
Since we announced last March that we were investigating knife and pill for COVID, Algernon has seen some 300 million shares trade. And we have had a significant number of people and eyes on our story. And in terms of now moving into the important drug development path, we're very excited about this development and this program, and we hope investors will also appreciate this significant announcement and what Algernon's embarking on.
Pardon me for my dog barking. I apologize, gentlemen. That's what happens when you do a show from your house. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who tuned in as well. And please subscribe to Street Smart Live. Give us a like by hitting the like button, and you just subscribe by hitting the button below as well. We have all kinds of interesting guests coming up in the near future, and you will not want to miss it. Until next time, be well and take care. Bye-bye.